Hey, what's up, Street Talks? Eric from the Eric Street Photography blog. It is a beautiful Wednesday morning, and I am super caffeinated. Had about 4 shots of espresso, and one of the things I wanted to do is continue the series of these video lecture PowerPoint slides regarding street photography. These are the exact slides that I often give to my street photography workshops, and I know a lot of those guys who aren't able to attend workshops or want to learn more about street photography. I just want to really dedicate my life to sharing all the information and knowledge I know about street photography and lessons I've learned along the way, and try to keep it as open and accessible to you guys as possible. So I'll continue to do a lot of these. And some people might be curious, oh, what are you going to do in workshops then? I'm thinking about having students watch these pre-recorded lectures before they come to the workshop. So during the workshops, we can actually spend it, giving more feedback on the individual students' photos, more time shooting, all stuff that you can't do all over the internet. But I think nowadays content, video, information is ubiquitous. So, anyways, ultimately, I hope these to be useful and helpful to you guys. And yeah, so we could kind of get into the meat of things. So, composition in street photography. I think making good composition in street photography is one of the most difficult things. The reason being is that there's so little we could do when we're shooting on the streets. I mean, things are moving really quickly. You got your camera, you're out trying to capture these beautiful, decisive moments. But how do you make a great photograph and compose it well while things are moving super quickly? And these are one of the challenges we have to address in street photography. To start off, honestly, it's a little bit half and half. When you see a good scene, of course, you want to compose well in camera, but there are situations in which it happens so quickly that you just have to take a photo instinctually. And therefore, in the editing phase, when you're actually looking at the photos you've taken afterwards, then you could judge the photos based on the compositions, and using that as a tool or a guideline whether to keep or ditch the shot. Another thing you might want to consider is, why is composition in street photography so important? So a lot of these things I'm teaching you guys about composition in street photography are from my good friend Adam Marelli. He's just check him out, adammorelli.com. He's probably the most knowledgeable person in composition that I've personally met. So a lot of these things I'm saying, I'm probably screwing it up, but I'm just going to share in terms of like how I understand it and how I think you could apply composition to street photography. But essentially, to me, one of the most important things about composition in street photography is that, you just want a photo that's aesthetically beautiful, that any other person who looks at your photo who might not know anything about photography will look at the photo and say, wow, that's a beautiful image, without knowing much about art and stuff. Because I do believe that there is something intrinsically beautiful about nice compositions. It's, if you look at nature, you see lots of fractals. They talk about like the golden ratio, this 3.14 number. And essentially, a good photograph, which is well framed and well composed, will be appreciated by anybody. B, when it comes to composition, you want to essentially show or tell the viewer, this is what you should be looking at, and this is what the photograph's about. Because a photograph that doesn't have a good composition, it makes it a little bit too difficult for the viewer to realize what should I be looking at. And ultimately, I think there's two things which make a great photograph. A, you want good content, and B, good form. So content is what exactly is happening in the photo. Is it a kid jumping over a puddle? Is it an old man at a cafe? And the second part is form, which is composition. How do you frame the shot? Where do you put your subject? So essentially, what you photograph and how you photograph it. So whether the shot's interesting in terms of subject matter and also in terms of the composition, both of these things are really important. But for me, at the end of the day, honestly, I think content is more important than form, meaning the soul of the photograph and what you're photographing is, in street photography, I think is more important than how well composed it is. So honestly, composition, it could be a little bit overrated in the sense that you don't want to make a photograph that's pretty for compositional sake. You want to make a photo that stirs your viewer, that speaks to his or her soul, the photos that talk about humanity, and photos that you could empathize with on a more emotional level. And of course, you want a good enough composition to hold it all together. So there's all these different street photography techniques and different ways you could compose photos on the streets. To me, these are the most fundamental ones, which I think you could actually apply in street photography. There's all these other compositional rules and techniques we could talk about, but these are the ones that I think you could directly apply to your photography. So the first thing we could apply in our street photography to make better photos are diagonals. So in life, there are generally three types of lines. You got the horizontal line, the vertical line, and the diagonal line. So generally, lines that are horizontal, you think about things that are at rest. Imagine a guy lying on his back. Horizontal lines tend to be very stable. They don't move around. They're solid. After that, you have a vertical line. In a vertical line, think about trees, think about poles, think about skyscrapers. They're really tall, really powerful, but a lot more stable and, sorry, a lot less stable than a horizontal line because they could kind of shake around. And as a result of that, the word we're going to use is dynamic. A horizontal line is less dynamic than a vertical line. A vertical line is more dynamic than a horizontal line. And then after that, we have the diagonal line, which is the most dynamic out of all these lines. Because you think about a diagonal line, you think about a ramp, you think about things that are bending over. There's a lot of pent-up energy and there's a lot of potential, for movement. And the way I imagine a diagonal line is, you shove someone really hard and the second they're about to teeter-totter, they're in a diagonal line. And a photograph that is diagonal has a lot more energy, it's a lot more edgy. And I think street photos that really feel alive are photos that are more edgy, have more energy. And by incorporating more diagonals to your street photography, you can make more, essentially energetic photos. The way you can incorporate diagonals into your street photography is to kind of avoid the quote rule of thirds. So if you Google rule of thirds, I mean, I'm sure we've all seen it. If you guys aren't familiar with the rule of thirds, the concept is, assume this is your viewfinder, and then you could just kind of split into thirds, and these connecting points are where our eyes are drawn to our focus. So like, if you took a nice photo of like, nice little water bottle. Essentially, they say that if you want good balance in the photo, it makes it more interesting to frame it this way. The downside of the rule of thirds is the fact that it focuses mostly on horizontal and vertical lines, which means the images aren't as dynamic. But by adding more diagonal lines, you can make the photos much more edgy and interesting. And so, let's see, keynote. Okay. So the way we could do this is this essentially, this rule or this guideline, they call this the golden triangle. Let's go back to the Googles. Golden triangle. Okay. So actually, I don't know which one of these it is. Here it is. So anyways, the idea with the golden triangle is that you draw a diagonal line from one corner to the other, and you draw a reciprocal line. This actually isn't a good example. Sorry about that. Let me just go back to the presentation. So essentially, starting off, just draw a diagonal line from the bottom left corner to the top right corner. And then you draw an intersecting line, which is around a 45-degree angle. So if you guys remember your trigonometry or geometry classes, I think geometry classes, these are roughly 9 degrees. Sorry, I didn't actually measure this perfectly, but the intersecting points of these two diagonal lines, they call it the eye. And a good way to remember it is because your eyes are generally drawn to that area. And if you imagine in putting a rule of thirds grid over this golden triangle, essentially it's kind of the same point as the intersecting point of the rule of thirds. And you could draw this golden triangle any other way you like. You could do it in the bottom left corner. You could flip it around. And as a cool tip, I could show you guys in Lightroom, you could actually superimpose this golden triangle grid over your own photographs. So let me see any of the photos that I've taken recently. Okay, let's see. What can we do? Okay, so this is a photo I shot in downtown LA on my Rico recently. Nice light, and if you guys, maybe this Pinocchio nose is something else that's on our mind. I'm not going to describe the shot too much, but essentially the way you could access this rule of thirds overview is you could go under the Develop tab. The hotkey for Develop is D, so the hotkey for that. And then you go over to the Crop tool, You could do this manually by clicking on it, or you could just press the hotkey for crop, which is R, like crop is in crop. And see, I already have it superimposed. So by default, let's see, it is rule of thirds. And this is actually really cool. If you want to change the overview for the rule of thirds, you just press O. So O, think about overlap or overview. So there's all these different ways you could split it. And you got the Fibonacci spiral here. Honestly, I never use any of these, but by default, I keep it on the golden triangle. So you could see here, you have these intersecting, these perpendicular intersecting lines. And these 2 points here, kind of the eye. And if you hold shift while pressing O, you could actually change the orientation of the golden triangle. And so, if you look at this photograph, I didn't frame this photo with the golden triangle in mind, but if you, after the fact, you could kind of see the photo has pretty good structure to it, pretty good balance. I didn't crop the shot, just shot it looking through the viewfinder, and yeah, it has good balance. And so if you want to kind of, better judge your compositions, you could check this out in Lightroom. So going back to the composition. So you might think, okay, nice little diagonals and intersecting lines. How can you actually practically use it? So first of all, what I would recommend is when you're shooting on the streets, don't think too much about these intersecting lines, the eye, blah blah. Just try to think about how you could compose along the diagonal. And you might also ask yourself, does anyone in real life actually use it? So believe it or not, Henri Cartier-Bresson actually did. The reason we know this is because after he shot a lot of his photos and he had them printed, he would actually take tracing paper and draw all these grids and the compositions on his photos after the fact. And the reason he did this was so he could continue to analyze his photographs. And so the next time he'd go out and shoot, he tried to make better photos in the camera rather than after the fact. So if you look at this overview and look at this photo he shot in Romania, you see, sorry if I'm causing epilepsy, a lot of these things he did intentionally. And this photograph he took, wonderful image, a couple in a train. I think what makes this photo great is the fact that you have all these diagonals over the image, but you also have a lot of triangles. So looking at this photo, can you see all these triangles in the frame? So spoiler alert, you can see, yeah, tons of triangles. There's a triangle of the lady's elbow. There's a triangle in the woman's hips. There's a triangle in kind of the crotch of the dude. There's a triangle in the top right corner. There's tons of triangles. And a good way to see diagonals and triangles are just by gestures. So for me, if I saw this scene in real life, I would just be focused on this woman with her elbow arched up. And you could kind of see how this photo stacks up. And it kind of draws your attention to this intersecting point, which is the subject's faces. And, and the nice thing about this photograph, honestly, if you take the subway or bus or public transit or whatever, you could see scenes like this all the time. Another photograph, a lovely photo of Martine Frank's legs. So this is actually Cartier-Bresson's second wife, and she's also an amazing photographer. The reason why this photograph is so powerful is that it's a formal study of his wife's legs. And if you have a significant other, husband, wife, girlfriend, partner, whatever, if you're just sitting at home, you just need to make nice photos, you just take a photo of your partner. And she's obviously got pretty sexy legs, and he could have photographed this 100 different ways, but he's purposely made her leg go across this diagonal. And do you see the intersecting point? So this is the main diagonal, and yeah, you have this other the intersecting diagonal, which kind of highlights her hips and her knees. And yeah, and the effect of the diagonal is that it makes her legs look longer, more slick, more sexy. And even a way you can make better diagonals when you're shooting on the streets or of people not moving is just tilting your camera a bit to force the diagonal. So not always do you have to make a perfect golden triangle when you're shooting on the street. So for example, in this photograph, essentially Cartier-Bresson took a photo of this nice little lady in a park, and the way he's framed this and put her in the image is he's trying to make her as far in the diagonal as possible. And after the fact, we could also see all these other nice little diagonal lines he's got in this photograph. But what I also think makes this a great photograph is the fact that she has her arms in an interesting gesture, kind of clutching, which also makes nice little diagonals in her arms, as well as little triangles. And we're going to talk about triangles a little bit later. Another good way to create diagonals in street photography is not just from the diagonals that you get, which are purely visual forms, but also the direction in which people are walking or the direction in which people are looking. So this is one famous photo by Rene Burry, a Magnum photographer. Essentially, he took a really high perch, looked down, and he took probably like about 8 photos of this scene. And they call this the quote fishing technique, in which you see your composition and you essentially wait for the right people to walk the right direction. And so in this photograph, you could see these men looking at these 2 beautiful women walking by, who knows what they're saying. And so in one case, you could see a diagonal because they're looking that way. And you also see all these other complementary diagonals going the same way. These women are also walking a diagonal to the top right corner. You have all these other lines in the background which support that. And if you just kind of combine all of it, you kind of have this wonderful crisscrossing, which is a lot more dynamic, and there's a lot more movement. There's a lot of energy to the shot. Another way you can make better photos is by incorporating leading lines. So a way I would describe leading lines is, imagine that you have a photograph and you have a subject, and you want to make it very easy for your viewer to know what to look at. So the purpose of a leading line is you're essentially having these lines and you're pointing them to the subject in the frame, and you're telling your viewer, hey guys, look at this. This is my subject. This is what's interesting. This is what's going on. Take note. And another way I think about it is, imagine you're driving a Porsche in a crisscrossy mountain road. The leading lines are essentially the rails which keep you on course without falling off the cliff. So, very famous photograph by Joseph Kudelka. And the best way I've heard this photograph described was by John Sarkowski, who was one of the most famous curators of the New York Museum of Modern Art. He described it as having this leading line, if you guys could see it, as a rusty hook, which is holding this guy by the throat and dragging him to his eventual demise. So, you could see this leading line in the dirt here, and it almost looks like that hook, which is pulling you towards that direction. And another good reason why this photograph works is, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the fact that the man is a black figure and is separated against all this white space around him. They call this quote figure to ground, or he is the figure and the ground is the background. So there's good separation between those 2 elements. And he's also closest to you in the frame. And sometimes centering your subject is also, I think it's fine. A lot of photographers who look at the rule of thirds like, oh, you shouldn't center your subjects, blah blah. Honestly, it just kind of depends. I think in this case it's fine because you have this strong leading line that's going straight to him, and his eyes are also kind of pointed in the bottom right corner. So moving on, another great photo by Cartier-Bresson. And yeah, you could draw the leading lines pointing straight to this guy's head. And you could also see very subtly that in the darkroom, Cartier-Bresson or his printer, I don't know who did it, slightly dodged or made his head brighter so his face would pop out from the background. So when you're looking at this photo, think to yourself, how would this photo be different if Cartier-Bresson, let's say, crouched down really low? Imagine what would happen to this guy's head. So you got it. If he crouched down really low and shot this guy crouching down, his head would probably move up like 2 centimeters in the frame. And therefore, the leading lines would actually not take you straight to the guy's head, but to like his chest, which is not what we want the viewer to look at. We want them to look at this guy's head. What would happen if the photographer, aka Cartier-Bresson, stood on top of a ladder, really high and shot looking down? What would happen to the position of this guy's head? So if that happened, then his head would be moved down about 2 centimeters, and therefore this leading line would take you a little bit above his head, not directly to his head. So when you're shooting with leading lines, your position is absolutely critical. Sometimes crouching down a little bit, moving a little bit to the left, moving a little bit to the right, or tippy toeing could really change the effect of the leading lines, and you want it generally to go straight to somebody's face. So you could see all these lines going to his head. Photo by Nikos Ekonopoulos. I can never pronounce his last name correctly. But yeah, simple photograph. You could see the leading lines taking you straight to this dude right here. Another photograph. This is why it's nice to shoot in back alleys, because you already have all these nice leading lines which take your eyes to the subject. And in this photograph in New York City by Cartier-Bresson, you see a guy with a hat slumped over, and looks like he's staring at a dog or a cat. I'm not exactly sure what, but it's kind of a sad story. It's open-ended. Maybe this is his only friend in the world or something like that. But the fact that the leading lines take you straight to the subject. This is a much more complex version of a leading line. It's one of my favorites by Joseph Kudelka. And you could see the way he's crafted this image is that, do you see so anyways, I'm not going to give it away yet, but look at this image. And can you see the leading line in this photograph? So take a look at the little flowers in the background. So another tip that I learned about photos is that generally subjects best work in odd numbers, especially in threes. So, you have these three people perfectly spaced and this little kid in the bottom right corner. And so you could see this leading line from the pattern of these little flowers in the background, taking you from the far left, the guy in the fiddle, to the middle, the guy with the tie, then all the way down to that little kid in the bottom right corner. And you could also see Kudelka has, in the darkroom, dodged this kid, made him a little bit brighter so you could better see him. So you see this nice little leading line taking you through the frame. I think it's one of the most brilliant, amazing leading lines I've ever seen. And it's funny, this project on the Gypsies, aka the Roma people, which is the more politically correct term now, most of the shots are posed. And in street photography, people are like, oh, how can you make an authentic or a good photograph without posing people? And I think honestly, it just depends on your personality. I think street photography, which is posed, I don't think that is necessarily any better or worse than candid photos. For me, at the end of the day, an image is something that stirs me emotionally, and whether it's candid or posed or whatever doesn't really concern me too much. And this is a much more broad and liberal definition of street photography. But in this case, my thought is he's probably told the kid in the bottom right corner to stand exactly where he wants to do it. And if you look at a lot of Kudelka's photos in his Gypsies project, you could see the amazing compositions he's had, probably by staging his photograph. But anyways, if you had imagined this photo without the kid, my mad Photoshop skills, your eye as the viewer, you would feel hanging, because you have that leading line that takes you to the awkward space, but you kind of need something to fill it. That's why it's good to have that kid. But if you didn't have any leading line in the background at all, the photo wouldn't be so distracting. So know that sometimes leading lines could be used to your advantage or your disadvantage. A classic example I see a lot of students make in street photography workshops is that they'll have a leading line in the background, which is generally the edge of a street, like a road leading to you in the background. But instead of having that road lead to a subject, it just awkwardly goes into the background, which takes your eyes out of the frame, away from the subject. So use leading lines with precaution. Another technique I want to teach you guys in street photography is this idea of figure to ground. So the concept of figure to ground is, you essentially just want to make a nice contrast between your subject and your background, so you could identify where the subject is and you have them pop and separate from the background. The reason why they call it figure to ground is figure is the subject and ground is the background. And a good way you could think about this is, so if you have a white background and you have a figure, let's say you're photographing someone with dark complexion, this photo has strong figure to ground. Because imagine if you photograph, let's say, a black guy and he had a black face against a white background, there'd be good separation. But if you're photographing a white guy, you would not want a white guy against a white background, because there wouldn't be enough separation. There would be a very weak figure to ground. Vice versa, if you wanted strong figure to ground, let's say you had a black background, then you would want to have someone with a lighter complexion, let's say a a white guy or an Asian guy against a black background, so there'd be separation. You would not want a black guy against a black background because there wouldn't be separation. So, practical ways you could apply this in street photography. Let's say you're shooting a street portrait, you see someone interesting on the streets that you want to make a photo of them with permission. If they are, let's say, a black guy or someone who's Latino who has darker complexion, you would not want them against, let's say a really dark colored background. Generally, what I'll do when I'm shooting street photography is I'll look around in the background and I'll have them just move around a bit, have them against a lighter colored background so there's better separation. Similarly, if you're photographing a white guy or an Asian guy, I'll have them step in front of a darker background so there's better separation. And so we could look at some examples. This is a photo, also another photo by Nikos Economopoulos. Sorry, Nikos, for mispronouncing your name. And how is the figure to ground in this photograph? So, can you see the little girl popping out from the background? Yes, because she's wearing a wonderful white dress against a black background. I could almost guarantee you he's posed her by saying, "Hey, stand there." But let's have a thought experiment. What if this little girl was on the right side of the frame against the white barn or tractor, or whatever it is? Could you see her? Once again, mad Photoshop skills. No, she would camouflage with the background. And if you think about camouflage, this is why animals, let's say if you're a hunter, more specifically you're a polar bear, that's why it's a good strategy to be a white polar bear against white snow, because then your subjects, or not subjects, your prey will not see you lunging at you. Similarly, this is why, like any other animal tries to blend in with the background. But in photography, we want good separation between the subject and the background. Moving on, another photograph by Joseph Kudelka, one of my favorites of his. Another tip is if you're shooting a subject or a person or whatever, you just want to make sure to have a little bit of white space or sometimes black space to separate your subject in the background. So in this case, he's taken a photo of this dog and it looks like the demon dog from Hades. If he crouched down when he took this photograph, what would happen to the dog? Yep, the dog would be overlapped with this black background, and therefore there wouldn't be enough separation between the dog and the background. So sometimes even tippy-toeing up and shooting down could create better separation. And another tip I learned from Adam Marelli was what he calls the figure to ground test. Generally, what you could do is, if you're like me and you have bad eyes, you could just take off your glasses and look at photos. And if you could look at a photo and your eyes are blurry, and you could see an outline of the subject against the background and still identify what the subject is, the photo has strong figure to ground. Another way you could do this, if you're blessed with good vision, is you could cover one eye and squint, or better yet, what I did right now, you could open up an image in Photoshop, apply the Gaussian blur filter, and essentially try to see this kind of separation. We could see this figure against the background. This passes the quote figure to ground test, and therefore there's good separation between the subject and the background. Once again, imagine if the dog or the wolf was white. Could you see it from the background? No, we couldn't. There wouldn't be a strong figure to ground. So another photograph by Kudelka. If Kudelka crouched down another inch or two, what would happen to this guy's head? It would look like the boat was literally sitting on top of his head and would be part of his hat. So you could see a little bit of that white space above this man's silhouette, and the boat is so crucial because it adds a sense of depth to the photograph. Without that little bit of white space, the photo wouldn't work. Once again, figure to ground test, good separation. Yep. This is also why when it comes to figure to ground, people love silhouettes, because having a nice black silhouette against a white background really helps the subjects pop out from the background. So, famous photo by Rene Burry. You could see the dark figures, the silhouette in the bottom right corner, really popping out from the white background. So, if we blur this photo, you could still see the subjects popping out from the background. Another way you could make your images pop out better is the areas of the strongest contrast are the areas that our eyes naturally gravitate towards. So you could see the blacks, the tonal value of the blacks, like how black the blacks are in the silhouettes in the right side of the frame against the white of the background. There's really strong contrast there. This the strongest exposure, contrast in the scene, as opposed to the left side of the frame, which is much more gray. So naturally, your eyes gravitate to the right side of the frame. The ways you can manipulate this is by dodging and burning in Lightroom, or if you print in the darkroom. But anyways, you could still see these figures. Therefore, this image it works really well, and I think it's just an awesome photo. It's like a scene out of like Reservoir Dogs or something like that. Curves are another way to make our images more dynamic. We talked about vertical lines, horizontal, vertical, then diagonal lines. Even more dynamic than a diagonal line are curves. And, tons of curves in nature. You think about curves like the shape of a woman's body, curves in terms of, imagine a racetrack. Once you go speeding through a curve, you actually go faster. And in nature, there's actually no perfectly straight lines. Everything in nature is curved. So we have a natural propensity to be interested in curves. And also, apparently, there's a theory that we are also kind of afraid of curves, aka snakes, because snakes are a common way to die. But anyways, moving on. One of the most famous photos by Cartier-Bresson. So the way that he made this photo is most likely, once again, the fishing technique is you see the scene, you frame it with your camera, and you're patient and you wait for the right person to enter your scene. And look at this photo and see all the curves you could see here. So you could probably see the curve in the rail, the curve in the street. And the position of the bike is perfect because had he taken the photo half a second earlier, the silhouette of the guy on the bicycle would just be overlapped with the railing. If you shot a half a second later, he'd either be totally out of the frame or a little bit of the front of his bicycle would be cut off. So the positioning, the timing is excellent. Once again, mad Photoshop skills. I love the content aware tool in Photoshop. So this is how he probably saw the scene and just was patient enough for this guy to enter the scene. Or who knows, maybe he just paid this guy like $5 to ride around the block a few times. Just kidding. And yeah, so some of the curves I personally seen, these aren't all the curves, but it really gives you a sense of movement, a sense of action. And even though this photograph, it's a still image, you could really feel the energy coursing through this image. Another great photo by Abbas. Look at all the curves you see in this photograph. So where do you see the curves? You see the curves in the falling building, in the hose, the stream of water. And it's a static image. The photo isn't moving, but we could literally see the building falling before our very eyes. And the reason we see that is because curves. So we could see a little curve here and some more curves here. It's a moving image. A lot of composition comes from nature, and a lovely photo by Martine Frank. When we look at this photo, what does it remind you of? You got it? Nautilus, or the inside of a shell. So, yeah, maybe one of the best ways to study composition is, just go on a walk in nature and see what you could find. Nice little lovely curves here. An example of some curves in a photo I took. So this is an old photo. I shot this in like 2011 or 2010 or whatever. Essentially, I was on a work break and I'm going up a set of escalators. And I think at the time I had like a Canon 5D and I'm shooting in P mode, ISO 1600, center point autofocus. And I see this guy walking past or about to walk into this photograph. And I essentially imagine the shot as using the escalator as a frame and waiting for him to step inside. And another pro tip is when you're having people walking in street photography, try to get their legs split in a V because it adds like two diagonals here. And the second he stepped inside, I saw his shadow on the far right of the frame and I just instinctively clicked. But it wasn't until actually I went home, I could see the third reflection in the far left. And I think that's kind of the cherry on top. So you could kind of see these curves in the frame. Triangles, these are probably my favorite compositional technique and tool. So generally triangles, you think about threes. There's three is like a golden number. You think about in stories, right? Three little pigs, three blind mice, three holy men, the Trinity, the Legend of Zelda, the Triforce, whatever. There's something about a triangle which adds a lot of harmony, balance to the photograph. And so we actually see a lot of triangles in Kudelka's work because he's kind of posed his photos to make these strong diagonals, or not diagonals, sorry, triangles. So this lovely photo in his Gypsies book. And what I love about this photo is, take a look at the kids. What do they look like? So to me, they look like, either a bunch of skeletons or scarecrows. And this kind of reminds me of my youth because, these kids look pretty tough. I don't think they're really famished. That's, what they're just doing. But you see the way that they're positioned in the frame creates a lovely triangle. And do you also see any other triangles in the frame? I'll cheat for you. You can see some triangles in the rib cages. Oops. And also some triangles around here. Lovely triangles. And you might think to yourself, did Kudelka do this on purpose? I think he did because he's done this a lot in his Gypsies project. Another photograph. He's got three different men, all positioned differently. And do you see the triangle amongst these three guys? Booyah! Yes, you have. And the way I've ordered this is, in terms of the depth, the guy who's number one is closest to us. Guy number two is in the top left. It's a little bit further away. And the guy in the third is the furthest away and is also in the dark. Another photograph by Kudelka. Do you see the triangle here? Pretty obvious, Boom. Right? But the reason I actually really love this photograph is, triangles beside. You have three different faces. You have the real face of the guy in the top right corner, and then a painted face in the bottom left corner, and then a metal face in the bottom right corner. And it's an open photograph in the sense that it's open-ended. You don't exactly know what's happening in this photo, and I think the photo offers more questions than provides answers. So who is this guy in the bottom left corner? Is that a painting of him when he was younger? Is it maybe his grandparent or his parent? And who is this person in the metal face in the bottom right corner? My suspicion for this photograph is Kudelka probably was like, okay, I want to make a nice portrait of you. You're by the window. You're chilling out on your bed or your couch or whatever. Hold this frame here. Oh, we need something else to complete the triangle. Put this face here. I don't know the exact story behind the photograph, but it's an amazing image. Another photograph by Martine Frank, a portrait of Cartier-Bresson. So it's the modern day, or not the modern day, the selfie in the 1992. You could see this nice little triangle between all three of them. Nice one. There's also a little bit more complex ways you could incorporate triangles in your photographs. So this is a wonderful photo by Bruce Gilden. Generally, people think about Gilden just single subject, flash, as a bully, whatever. Honestly, I think he's one of the best living street photographers. And this is a great photo because there's so much complexity in this frame, but he's also held together this composition with a triangle. So this one's a little bit more difficult to see, but can you see the triangle here? If you cannot see it, I will help you. So sometimes you could just divide the frame into three different parts. You see this couple on the top left about to kiss or embrace. You have this couple, an elderly couple in the bottom top right corner. And, you're kind of like, oh, what's exactly going on? I think what's happening is the guy in the top right corner is actually helping the other guy walk. Maybe he's blind. That's why he's clutching his arm, is squinting his eyes. And then you also, you see the cherry on top, that small detail, which makes this a great photograph, is this the couple shadow on the bottom of the frame. And all these things create a nice little triangle, which add a nice little balance to the frame. I think if there wasn't one of the elements in each of these corners, the photo wouldn't have balance and it wouldn't work. Right. Another great photo by Alex Webb. This photo is from his Istanbul series. And you could see the depth in this photo. You have this guy in the closest to you in the frame, the the bottom right or the right side of the frame. Then you have this older guy looking the bottom left corner. Then the cherry on top is this guy with like a gun who's kind of stake out on the top left of the frame. To me, this looks like a still from a movie. Like you know, the guy on the right is waiting for a phone call, and the guy in the top left corner is trying to snipe him or whatever. But anyways, you can see the triangle here, right? And but also imagine this photograph. If one of these subjects weren't in the frame, would this photo still work? So imagine this image without the guy with the gun in the top left corner, or without the guy in the bottom left corner or the far right. I think the photo would still, be a good photo, but it wouldn't be a truly great photograph. So mad Photoshop skills once again. Missing the guy in the top left. I mean, still a good scene, but missing a little bit of something there. Without this guy here, still missing something. And obviously you kind of need this guy to be closest to you in the frame. Alex Webb, also really good with the triangles. And you might think to yourself, did he really do this on purpose? Or is this just kind of an accident? I think it's probably a little bit of both. He's obviously looking for triangles when he's shooting, but sometimes you could discover triangles afterwards in the editing phase. And a very surreal photograph. Kid popping from the top left corner and this kid with the ball. Do you see the triangle here? This is how I see it. Imagine the photo without the ball. Would it work? Don't think so. Different ways you could incorporate triangles. So this photo is one of my favorite and edgy photos by Alex Webb. You have this woman, hand her in chest. It's a very heavy photo. And you have these 3 dogs, all perfectly placed in a triangle, all walking opposite directions. And to me, the effect of this image is that it's almost like these 3 dogs are pulling this woman into opposite directions. And if you think about like the Romans in the past, they strapped as torture or execution, they would take a prisoner or somebody, strap each of their limbs, arms and feet to like 4 horses in opposite directions, whip the horses, and then just like, people's limbs get pulled off. So thinking about this, this is like a masterpiece in my opinion. You don't see this kind of image every day, but I think the more you look at these kind of great images, the more you could kind of see and anticipate these kind of images down the line. Right? Another amazing photo by David Allen Harvey. And the way you could follow this image, so you could obviously see the triangle, hopefully by now. Nice little triangle here. But what makes this image a little bit more interesting is that if you follow the movement of this image in terms of the composition, there's kind of like this eternal triangle or sense of movement that permeates throughout the frame. So if you start with the top left corner, this guy's fingers pointing down to the dog. Then if you follow that line to the dog, follow the tail up to this little girl in the top right corner. Then she's also running to the top left corner. So there's like this eternal triangle, which, even though this is a fraction of a second, this image has so much movement and it's going to keep moving until the rest of the time. If this photo was missing any other element, like didn't have this girl, didn't have this hand, or didn't have this dog, the photograph obviously wouldn't work. So a good technique that I could suggest when you're shooting street photography and trying to create triangles, try to find 2 of the elements of the triangle, so 2 of the corners of the triangle. So let's say in this photograph, you have this guy's finger pointing to the bottom, in the top left of the corner. Then you have the dog in the bottom right corner. And then you're just patient and wait until someone in the top right corner enters the scene. This is an example of a triangle I've personally done in street photography. I was shooting in Mumbai with my friend Kaushal Parikh. And I see this kid in the bottom left corner, kind of arms hunched over looking at me. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Then in the top right corner, I see like his dad or his guardian or some dude just chilling. I'm like, okay, that's part 2 of the triangle. Then part 3 is this Hindu deity, or not exactly sure, on top of the frame. And the cherry on top for me was that little tiger in the center of the frame, which is like popping out at you. So if you could create a triangle composition, this is essentially what I saw. I made about 6 photographs of the scene. Let me see if I could actually see the contact sheet of this contacts. India contact. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is actually the contact sheet, and it looks like I actually got the shot in the first shot, but I wasn't quite sure, so I kept working the scene. So this was the first shot, second shot, third shot, fourth shot, fifth shot, sixth shot. Then I got really, really close and tried to shoot with a shallow depth of field. He looked down, click. And these are all the photos I took. Back to the presentation. Framing. Essentially, you're looking for a frame in the frame. I think this is pretty self-evident, but I'll show you some examples. So by Alex Webb, one of my favorites, boom, headshot, right? And it's funny because by looking at a lot of great street photographs or just photographs in general, you kind of build up this mental visual vocabulary, encyclopedia of images, and you start to see things repeat each other in real life and use that as a starting point to be inspired to make your own versions of the photographs. So when I was in, this is a photograph that I shot in Manila about 2 years ago. Essentially, I saw this guy's face through this frame here, and I thought exactly about this same thing here. So once again, it's not a direct rip-off, quote, quote, in the sense that it's a totally different scene, but I do encourage you to copy compositions and photos you've already seen if you see them again in real life, right? Everyone's inspired by somebody. Famous photo by Cartier-Bresson, frame in a frame, right? And last photo is a lovely photo by my friend Charlie Kirk. Essentially, the story behind this photo is that he'd go in this Tokyo department store up and down these escalators for like days and days and days, waiting for this perfect shot because he had an idea for this shot where he would frame this woman inside these intersecting diagonals. And finally, he made this one photo with a flash. For me, the cherry on top is actually, you could see this woman's hand in the bottom left corner as well. And so you could see all these frames within the frame. So anyways, yeah, these are all the things I have in my composition lesson. If you want to learn more about street photography and composition, you could go to the Eric Kim blog, so erickimphotography.com/blog. And if you go under the Start Here section, I've written lots of articles on composition and street photography. So if you just check it out here, if you want to see a little bit more in depth in terms of these compositional lessons, check out these articles. And once again, if you want to check out more about composition street photography, AdamMarelli.com, I think. Yeah. So Adam Marelli, oh no, we want to go to his blog. Oh, it looks like he's redone his website. Actually, I think it's Adam Marelli Photo, maybe. Oh yeah, there it is. Cool. So yeah, if you check out Adam Morelli's site, he's got tons of great articles on composition. Essentially, just check out his blog and his workshops. And also, I think if you go on YouTube, he has an excellent talk. Let's see, I think it's B&H Photo. Yeah, this is probably the best one I've seen regarding it. B&H, Bridging the Gap, Classical Art Designed for Photographers. This is absolute money, much better than my talk. So make sure to check that out. And yeah, so if you guys have any questions about composition, street photography, I think also if you go to my SlideShare, let's see, SlideShare, slideshare.com. Is it SlideShare or not? Yeah, Eric Kim Photography. So if you want to see these slides that I shared, just go to slideshare.net/Eric Kim Photography. And I have lots of slides up here. I believe, yeah, composition and street photography. Just check this out and you could see all of the slides that we essentially talked about here. But yeah, yeah, thanks guys for watching. If you have any other, I don't know why these aren't showing up. Oh yeah. So anyways, if you guys have any other ideas for, videos, articles, whatever, leave a comment below. Thank you guys for watching and spending your precious time with me. All right, peace out.